cyanide, but it's another also
To prove
To
it.
prove it.
prove it,
Yeah, that's
diba?
right. I mean, did you actually see them blast it?
Although sabi nga ng
Detonate the
BFAR and
cyanide,
also
right?
PCG na if you take a look at the coral reef in Bajo de Masinloc, talagang
Damaged.
destroyed siya, damaged na. But yun nga, wala pang evidence na talaga nakikita mo ba yung Vietnamese fishermen or
Yes.
Chinese na
Naghagis.
naghagis ng
Correct.
cyanide there.
Correct.
So that they have to get.
Tsaka yung sinasabi, yung intentional, yun yung sinabi ng mga Filipino fishermen, intentional na masira. Pero cyanide fishing, it's a, an ancient, hindi naman ancient,
Old
pero
problem.
old problem, old method of fishing.
So is Scarborough Shoal becoming a geopolitical flashpoint once again? As always, when we need some hard answers, we call in our fellow One News host, Richard Heydarian, who's also a political analyst and senior lecturer at the UP Asian Center. Sa hirap naman nun. That's a big, hard question to answer, no? How are you, Richard?
I'm good. Sana meron din kayong vlogger influencer as one of my
Slash.
Lahat na lang.
supermodel.
Sige,
We will
joking.
add it. We will add it next time. But yeah, your thoughts on what's going on at the Scarborough at Bajo de Masinloc. I mean, we were tackling two stories just now. First, potential. I underscore the word potential. Potential cyanide fishing. And then also the dangerous maneuvers which happened several days ago, supposedly by the Chinese Coast Guard, and also the floating barriers, which as of tonight, as far as we know, has been taken down. But still, again, these like small incidents. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, unang-una, I think this is a good reminder that we're facing multiple ticking time bombs there in the West Philippine Sea. Of course, the Ayungin Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal took a lot of our attention over the past 6 months or so because of the multiple incidents, the water cannoning, the disruption of our resupply mission, our hopes to fortify our position there without triggering any kind of conflict with China. But let's not forget, there's also the Reed Bank situation. We still don't know what are we going to do about it. Are we going to develop the resources there? And then not to mention Scarborough Shoal, no? Which is the beginning essentially of a new era in Philippine foreign policy. I mean, after the incident in Scarborough in 2012, the Philippines has not been the same in terms of our foreign policy, in terms of domestic discussion, in terms of awareness of what's happening in West Philippine Sea. Now, going back to this, of course, I defer to the officials to confirm whether what's being reported is the case. But if ever it turns out true, I mean, it's not totally shocking or surprising, right? Because remember back in the day, during the Duterte administration, there were reports by some media channels and journalists about, Chinese maritime forces or fishermen doing something, very destructive to our environment. In fact, there was a study by the Marine Sciences Institute in UP a few years ago that put the ecological environmental damage conservatively at hundreds of millions of dollars annually. So I think this is just if ever true, or even if it's not true, the reality is that we're facing a very difficult condition there in the Scarborough Shoal. If I'm not mistaken, you mentioned Vietnam also may have been involved in this. I think that's another thing that we have to keep in mind because the Vietnam aspect is very important. As you know, President Marcos was just in Vietnam the other week. We discussed maritime security cooperation. We discussed building a common front within ASEAN and beyond ASEAN in dealing with China on a unilateral front. But we also know that, Vietnam also has some overlapping claims with us. And the Vietnamese fishermen have been entering our waters. And there were some deadly incidents in the past. I think 2017, there was an incident between Philippine Navy and the Vietnamese fishermen. So it's not only China, it's also Vietnam, except it's not at the same level. The kind of harassment we're facing from China, the 9-line claim of China is incomparable to what Vietnam is doing. So what that means is I won't be surprised some pro-China elements in the Philippines and propagandists will try to exaggerate any Vietnamese angle possibly to what's happening in the Scarborough Shoal or beyond. So that's the other thing I'm also watching out for right now.
Well, for now, no, Richard, just to clarify for all our viewers, it was a statement of the Filipino fishermen in Bajo de Masinloc. They said allegedly it was Chinese and Vietnamese fishermen, and I think
Right.
authorities are busy trying to verify that as well as the cyanide fishing accusations as well. But what do you make of that barrier removal? Is that kind of China taking a step back and saying, well, if people do see a barrier, maybe they'll really pin us as the bad guys here? Was it something like that, maybe?
Yeah, I think the Chinese are still scratching their head and scrambling for a response to the Philippines kasi itong proactive transparency initiative ng Philippine Coast Guard, itong itong mga madaldal natin mga kaibigan, mga spokesman ng Philippine Coast Guard, the mga others, this is something very shocking to China. I think they've been struggling. Last time I checked, I think even the Twitter account of Philippine Coast Guard was hacked or something, and there was an accusation that some friends maybe from the other side were involved in this. So I think China is really struggling. In fact, I saw some of the commentaries in China recently in some of their newspaper where some Chinese experts are suggesting that it's time for them to show their sword. That's the terminology that they're using. So I'm absolutely certain that there are very vehement debates within the Chinese maritime forces establishment on how to best deal with the Philippines, because they're looking for their own Goldilocks approach, right? They want to be tough and strong enough to impress their own people, and this way the Philippines. At the same time, I think the Chinese also are wondering. I mean, you don't want to give the Marcos administration even more reasons to fortify its relationship with the United States and give more reasons to Japan, Australia, and the US to come to the picture. So it's a very delicate balancing act also on the part of China. But one thing that I think all of us have to keep in mind is that, you know, the not the black swan, but the gray rhino here is the role of militia forces and some Chinese fishermen who may not necessarily be doing things on the command of the Chinese military or officials. So there's some rogue elements there, including perhaps the one who was behind the Reed Bank incident in 2019. If you remember, we still don't know exactly what happened there. It looks like a Chinese militia was involved in that, and we don't know how much of command structure following and compliance is happening there. So actually, one thing we're very worried about is crazy rogue activities by militia forces or, let's say, overzealous fishermen from other rival claimants there. And it takes just one lethal incident or fatal accident for things to get out of control, especially given how tense things are right now.
Now, PBBM urging, continuing, di ba, urging BFAR and PCG's presence in the waters, in our territory. Sa tingin mo ba, Prof, this will stir tension? Tama ba na magsalita siya ng ganon on his part right after the recent incident?
Well, I mean, I think this is a new era for the Philippines in terms of, you know, maturation. I mean, let's be honest, ang gulo ng foreign policy natin. Minsan, beshi tayo ng China. Minsan, ayaw natin sa China. So now, finally, I think the Philippines is trying to draw the line and say we have no problem with diplomacy with China, which is exactly the position of President BBM. He has had multiple conversations with Xi Jinping and Chinese leadership over the past year or so. But there has to be red lines, and the Philippines has to gain the respect of China, of course, grudgingly, by standing its ground. It's not going to be riskless, but it's part of the maturation of our maritime strategy in this part of the world. I mean, if you look at all our officials from National Security Council, from the Philippine Coast Guard, among others, of course, as a West Philippine Sea so-called experts, I deal with these people, and I'm very impressed by their learning curve, and I'm also impressed by how proactive they have been. Again, this is not riskless, but let's not forget, we are doing this because we are being bullied. So let's not gaslight ourselves. You know, this is the problem. A lot of strategic gaslighting is happening. Philippines is being blamed when in fact we're just defending what is ours. And China's 9-dash line has no basis in international law.
The maturation of our West Philippine Sea strategy, I love that. But if you think the strategy in the past several years has been confusing, what's one thing you'd like to see clearly? Let's pretend that the president is watching right now. What's one thing you would ask for?
Oh, he is watching. I'm just kidding. No. I mean, for me, there's still room for improvement. I don't want to lose the opportunity of interviewing somebody. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, the thing is, sometimes, some officials, I think, are kind of, maybe they have the midterm elections in mind, right? I think there's some officials there who are kind of compensating for their total silence during the Duterte years. Okay, I'm not gonna name names, but I think, medyo hinay-hinay lang tayo. Let's leave this to the DFA. Let's leave this to the National Security Council. Let's leave this to the Philippine Coast Guard. Let's leave this to the president, right? And as I said before, I'd rather have the DFA and the president take a lead rhetorically on this. And as much as I think National Security Council and PCG are doing a good job, but I think the problem sometimes is that there are a lot of people who are trying to, I don't know, it kind of comes off as grandstanding, right? And compensation for their past silence. But again, for me, it's part of the maturation process, right? You're going to make mistakes. There's going to be some, excesses here and there. But I'm generally optimistic about the direction of Philippine policy. Having said that, as I always said, you have to prepare for contingency. Things could get ugly. And I won't be surprised China will indeed show its sword, kumbaga, metaphorically, if not figuratively at some point, just to test how much the consensus in the Philippines holds. Because the consensus, as you talk also to our good friend, say Professor Rai from Okta, if you look at almost all key surveys, they show that majority of Filipinos want us to take a tough stance against China. I'm sure there's some in China saying, tignan nga natin kung matapang talaga sila, i-test nga natin yung limits nila. So this is where things are going to get tricky, and that's why we have to be prepared, not only operationally, but also in terms of propaganda. Because a lot of our pro-China friends in the Philippines are ready to exaggerate anything to instill fear and diffidence into the heart of the Filipino people. I'm not saying it will work, but I'm saying we have to be prepared for that.
I get what you're saying, because sometimes all that noise just does nothing but muddy the water, essentially, right? So it sounds like we're all over the place. We're going to have to leave that there for now, but as always, thanks so much for your insights. That was Richard Haydaran, political analyst and senior lecturer at the UP Asian Center, One News host, and also social media influencer.
Blogger.
Thank you.
Blogger.
See, I added it. Social media influencer and blogger. Thank you so much.
Because I thought we'll talk about Prabowo, TikTok,